shelter in the shadows from the creatures of the night. Tentacles that slither just out of sight. Dark curses conjuring an endless dreadful blight. Beware the evil that goes bump in the night, lest you give yourself a fright with Mystic Moon tonight.
All right, good evening, everybody. How's it going out there in virtual land? We've got a great show planned for this evening. One of our favorite people to talk to here tonight, Brandon Weston of the Ozark Traditional Healing and Folk Magic and Folklore and all kinds of fun things like that. Anyway, don't know where we want to kick off, but Jake, what would you like to say tonight?
Well, I'm just saying, hi, peeps. Thanks for tuning in. Brandon, I think you were on our show over a year ago. I think last time we checked, you just finished the book. You had outlined the new book, which is the spell book. We'll drop links, people. We'll drop links. And yeah, it's good to catch up. You were a fabulous guest last time. We got to talk all about Ozark cryptids. I remember that far more than the magic.
Yeah, it was a fun show. Yeah, I don't get to talk about cryptids a lot, and it was great. Yeah.
Very good. All right. So kicking off, you had a book come out, golly, almost a year ago now. Is that right? The spell book. Would you like to tell us a little about that one, and we can spread out from there?
Yeah. So the Ozark Mountain Spellbook came out last summer, 2022. Yeah, it's a continuation from the first book, Ozark Folk Magic, Plants, Praise, and Healing. Whereas the first book is sort of a good foundation, jumping off point, with a lot of historical information and foundational information. The spellbook is really a practice guide. And so they are, independent books. They tie together. But if you are just looking for some practice stuff, the spell book has a great introduction with magical considerations and a lot of the stuff that's from the first book. And it is just full of spells and rituals and remedies and all sorts of good stuff.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I figure you probably have another book in the works, and it's probably still top secret because it hasn't published yet. But can you tell us anything, or is one happening soon?
I do have another one in the works. Yeah, you were correct. Right now, it looks like probably first part of the year next year, hopefully. Okay. Yeah, so it's going to be playing off of the same sort of theme of this, Ozark folk magic and folk healing traditions, but it's going to focus a little bit more on the charming tradition. So verbal charms, prayers, that sort of thing. And, traditionally you have, the sort of ritual methods that you see in like the Ozark Mountain Spellbook. And then you have another tradition that was really based in what I like to call reactionary magic. And so, if you're in the grocery store and you see your enemy and that you think they gave you a curse or something, what is a memorized verbal charm that you can pop off your head without having to, set a protective circle and bring out your candles and all of that. Right. And so the charming tradition in the Ozarks is a really interesting area to look at. There's a lot of cool verbal charms that have been passed down orally. Some go all the way back to medieval Europe. Some go even further back to Greek and Arab sources as well. And so it's really interesting to see these sort of rhymes and prayers and verses that have been passed down, from speaker to speaker, from charmer to charmer for hundreds of years. And it's interesting to see those still employed today in the Ozarks. And then, this is sort of my way of gifting some of these charms to, a new generation to new interested people. So it's going to be really fun. It was a really fun one to write. There's a lot of folklore in this next one, and so that I always like writing the spells and the history and stuff, but I'm also a creative writer, so I really like writing the folklore and folk tales and stuff like that.
Oh,
so
sure.
There's a lot of that stuff that's going to be in the next one.
Fantastic. I can't wait.
It's going to be fun.
Now, do you have any, like, one you could share off the top of your head, or?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, there's a bunch of traditional ones, and so some people have probably heard that. So there's a charm for blowing the fire out of a burn. So this goes back to Appalachian sources as well as Ozark sources. But the idea is that if you burn yourself and you don't do anything about the fire that's in the wound, it will go to the bone and create a permanent pain or a permanent illness within the bone. And so if you burn yourself, you've got to blow the fire out, or you've got to send the fire out in some way. And so there in the Ozarks, there were specialized healers who knew how to do this. And most often they used a combination of specific verbal charms as well as blowing over the wound. And so one of the ones that I collected that is a pretty common one, it goes, 2 angels came out of the east. One brought fire, the other brought frost. In frost, out fire. And you blow 3 times over the wound. So yeah, the verbal charms in a lot of cases aren't very complicated. Sometimes they're very short. One unique feature about this charming tradition is that a lot of times we make use of Mother Goose rhymes. And nursery rhymes, some of which you might remember from your own childhood. There are a lot of those sort of rhymes that have been transformed into sort of a magical rite or a magical ritual. I have a theory that a lot of these probably originated as verbal charms and then got, passed down and then turned into nursery rhymes and things like that. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of cool things in there.
Oh, fantastic.
I know I can say just like, I'm kind of surprised. I'm looking at Retribution. The new one. And I kind of wasn't expecting to see that, but one stood out to me because I had never heard of something like this before. And it is to put your enemy under a waterfall.
Yeah. So retribution work is a big part of Ozark traditional folk magic, but it's one of the areas that gets talked about the least. Traditionally, anything that involved curses or harming somebody or anything like that, in the old days, it was considered to be witchcraft, and witchcraft was always evil. And so healers, if they did any of this type of work, they really didn't tell people about it. But it is a foundational part of the work. It's basically, it goes along the idea of a cleansing rite. So essentially what you're doing is you are cleansing a situation. You're either cleansing somebody of a curse, or you're cleansing the bond between you and an enemy. But along with the cleansing rite, what you're doing is you're sending this curse back to the person that sent it. And so it's a sort of cursing by proxy sort of situation. So you're not outright doing anything, untoward. But you are sending this stuff back. And so, yeah, putting somebody under a waterfall, there's, sympathetic magic, this idea that if you possess something of a person, you can manipulate that person or manipulate the situation around that person. So sometimes all it takes is having some hair or some clothing from a person, and you can work on that person magically. Traditionally in the Ozarks, this was used much more by healers to be able to work on their clients remotely, but it was also used as a form of retribution work. So you could take some of this hair and clothing and put it in a black bag and then set it underneath a waterfall so that your enemy will have arthritic pains in their joints and things like that. And so there's a lot of this type of work, and it really surprises people. I think Ozark folk culture in general really has this image of, very nice sort of church going folks, but the amount of church going grannies I have met who had curses underlined in their Bible, in case they need them.
Just in case.
There are a ton out there, because as I was taught by one of my teachers was what I would call a praying granny, which is basically the lady in town that has a Bible verse for everything. She went to church multiple times a week, and I was really interested specifically in Bible verses and as verbal charms. And so we worked together some, and I asked her about her curses that were underlined. The book of Psalms, by the way, is full of good curses, fiery arrows raining down on your enemies and things like that. And so I asked her about this retribution work, and she just matter-of-factly said, well, God gives with one hand and takes with the other hand, and we work with the power of God. So we give with one hand and we can take with the other. And that's the whole basis of this sort of retribution work, is that, yes, you can give, but you can also take when you need to, too.
Who are we hearing there, Jake?
Roxy is eating her brother's face. One moment.
Okay, that's all. As Jake walks away into the virtual land.
Right. Disappears into the background.
I read a lot. I read a lot all the time, but one of my favorite, like these cozy supernatural books, I read, and the one witch she's always saying, "Bless your heart and hex your hiney." I like that one. I think that's giving in one hand and taking away with the other.
It absolutely is. Yeah. I mean, there really is this sense, and for me, it makes complete sense as a worker. I want you to heal, but maybe the thing that is going to get you to heal is having a little bit of a, a little bit of a hard time.
Yeah.
A little bit of a push. And so, I've done work for clients before where the basis of the work is essentially, I want this person to have a good, happy, healthy life as far away from me as possible. And so that's sort of the basis of this idea of retribution work, is that it's not a form of, just outright cursing whoever we want to curse. In Ozark terms, it's always a reactionary work. So it is always prompted by a curse being sent, or by an enemy doing something, that sort of thing. I like to call it the sort of I'm rubber, you're glue sort of method.
Cozy cursing. Okay.
Yeah.
Cozy curses. Yeah. It's like, nothing too bad's gonna happen, but you're gonna GTFO for me.
Right.
Clear my area. There we go.
Clear my area. Everyone needs a little repenting, to become their better self.
Now, is there a protection of some sort, be it, a sigil, satchel, whatever you want to do, but that might be more of a mirror type curse? Anything coming at me is going to pop back at you and hit you threefold or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that stuff. In the Ozarks, there's a lot of spell work that focuses on either blessing water or olive oil, and then using that to either wash the body or anoint the body, so that, if you do this ritual, you will be protected by this materia. So, you do this morning bath, and then you're protected, the entire day, and then you do the morning bath the next day along with a prayer or whatever it might be. So there's definitely a lot of stuff like that, almost to create sort of magical armor on the skin itself. And so, Ozark people are very practical people. We're going to use things that we've got around the kitchen, that we can grab. And so, traditionally, there were a lot of these sort of magical oils and balms that were made for this specific purpose. So oils to protect you from the evil eye. So you would take this oil and you would rub it into a newborn baby every day. Helps with their skin, but then also it helps protect them from the evil eye, because children are very susceptible to the evil eye. And so there are lots of those, and I love them because they're simple. They usually just involve having a bowl of the oil and then reciting verbal charms and blowing over it, or, marking it with a cross or different symbols. And then you can keep it in a jar and have it around. And so there are definitely those sorts of deflection spells.
Perfect. Jacob's not going to say anything.
I was going to say, this isn't my strong suit.
That never stopped you before, hon.
Good point. Good point. So I will say, in this book versus the first one, you have absolutely lovely photographs in. So what we're seeing in the pictures, is that actually, that's like the recipe come done, right?
Yeah. So, and also like the spell book has a lot more sort of descriptive images too, because a big part of the spells are creating sigils and spell papers and things like that. And so, there was a lovely artist that did up those to where people can sort of understand my scrawlings. But there's a big element of drawing and this sort of writing on papers and things like that as a part of a lot of Ozark spell work, mostly as a way of really connecting your intention to the work itself. So by creating this paper, you're really funneling your intention into the image that's being produced, and then that directly connects to the work. There are also spell bags and amulets and things like that that include papers with your full name on them to connect the amulet directly to you. So in Ozark folk magic, there are all sorts of identifying materials. These are things like hair, fingernails, stuff like that. But in the Ozarks, we also have, signatures, your handwriting. This is a unique sort of fingerprint to you. And so this stuff can also be used as identifying materials. So as we sort of draw out the sigils or write out the names on papers, we're connecting ourselves to the work. So this one was fun to have a lot of different drawings and stuff in it.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
The spell book also, there's a chapter specifically geared towards divination. There's also a chapter geared towards dream work, trance work, sort of spirit work, things like that. And those were really exciting for me to write about, because spirit work is one of those sort of big areas of my personal practice. And so the first book, I got to write a little bit about that. But then second book, I actually got to detail some spells that have helped me in the past, develop dream work as divination and different things like that. So that's very exciting.
Oh, good deal. Now, when you say spirit, are you talking about outside spirits or our own inner spirits?
Well, a little bit of both. But we certainly, in the spell book, we talk about outside spirits a lot. So there are spells where we connect to land spirits, where we connect to house spirits, honoring the spirits of the home, honoring the spirits of the land as a part of the magical process. It's a lot of developing our own spirit, because we too are spirits. But then it's also connecting with that sort of invisible world around us as a part of our magical practice.
Now, that includes like the wood nymphs and different fae folk, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. In the Ozarks, we have a lot of different invisible entities that roam around. So typically, one of the big ones is the little people here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of work either with the little people, or most of it is, making sure the little people don't curse your land or
Right.
burn your house down, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of sort of ways of appeasing the little people with offerings and things like that. And so, yeah, in this book, I talk about the little people, but that's an area that's, there's a lot of cautions surrounding working with
Sure.
those entities. But yeah, there's definitely spells that connect to the idea of the sight or the second sight, which is a big thing in Ozark folk practice, where you have these senses that can see or hear or feel into that other world. And being able to develop those by connecting to ritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, help me out. I don't remember approximately when, the settlers moved into the Ozarks, but was there any trouble back in the 1600s with the witch finders and the trials and everything?
Well, so the Ozark people moved from Appalachia around 1800.
Okay.
But I will say that there were definitely reminiscences of like the witch finders and things like that in old Ozark folk culture. So Vance Randolph, who is probably the most famous Ozark folklorist, he collected a lot of stuff around the turn of the 20th century. So a lot of the people he was talking to, were born almost at the point of settlements in some cases, and so they had a lot of interesting stories. There at one point, you don't see it much anymore, but there was a specialized sort of magical practitioner in the community called a goomer doctor.
Okay.
And in Ozark speak, goomering is witchcraft, is being cursed. And so a goomer doctor is someone who knows how to doctor the goomering. They know how to heal these curses,
Okay.
hexes, and stuff like that. There was also the witch finder or the witch hunter. Sometimes they were also called the witch doctor. It's not that they were a doctor who was a witch, but they knew how to doctor the witchcraft. They knew how to heal it. And so there were a lot of these specialized healers who, their entire job in the community, they didn't work with herbal medicines or anything like that. Their entire job in the community was removing a curse and sending that curse back to the witch who sent it and making them ill or killing them. So there was a lot of, I would say, magical warfare going on and very little physical warfare going on.
Okay.
I think Vance Randolph wrote an article about the sort of last witch trial in the South, which occurred in a county in the Arkansas Ozarks. If I'm remembering correctly, it might have been in Missouri, but it was the sort of witch trial in the Ozarks. And it was sort of blown out of proportion. But it was a case that made it into like the newspapers in the area and stuff, of a community had brought their local witch to a sort of trial in the community, and nothing really ended up coming from it. But it did really show how, it was a very fine line to walk between being, a healer and being a witch. And today, it's different, but there are still, places in the Ozarks where I may call myself a healer or spiritual healer, but I would refrain from calling myself a witch.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I understand.
But, I would say probably 70 to 80% of the Ozarks today is, people are reclaiming the word witch. They're calling themselves village witches, all sorts of stuff. So it's definitely changing. But yeah, in the early days, you were fighting, if you were fighting against curses and hexes, you were fighting against witchcraft, and so it just held that connotation. And so the witch hunter or the Goomer doctor had to know how to identify witches and how to supposedly kill witches and things like that.
Right.
There are a ton of traditional ways of identifying a witch, and I kind of want to go through a few because they're hilarious.
Okay.
So in Ozark folk belief, salt is connected with like goodliness, like, because salt is a protective mineral. It's you put salt in holy water to preserve it and to add to the effect and stuff like that. So there was an old folk belief that if a woman in the community complained about her food being too salty, that she may be a witch.
Oh my goodness.
There was another one where you can take 3 new nails and put them in the shape of a triangle in the door frame, like to the outside of the house. And if a witch walks through the door, the nails will pop out of the door frame. So you'll know that a witch came into your house. There's one of my favorite ones is if you put a thumbtack or a nail in a chair and a person sits on it and they feel the nail, they are normal. But if they don't feel it, they are a witch then. So that's how you can know too.
Oh man.
So, there are lots of very interesting ones. And for me, as a sort of folklorist and practitioner, it's interesting to see how there has really been a transformation in the Ozarks from focusing on individuals within the community who is a supposed witch. And that was really reminiscent of very old types of work. These days, you still find traditional healers who target witchcraft, but the witch is no longer in the community. It's these sort of, I like to call them mythical or cosmic witches. So you see a lot of, I'm taking this curse out and sending it to the witch in the woods. Well, it's no longer a person. It's this sort of idea of evil or idea of this sort of source of evil that is in these mythic areas. And so that for me is kind of interesting to look at, going from the witch is the widow who lives down the street to the witch is this creature that lives on this mountain and we never go to the mountain because that witch is there, but it's not actually a person.
That reminds me of how grandma would refer to the hill folk, oh no, we don't mess with the hill folk. But so yeah, the whole spirit of it, even as opposed to we never went up in the hills and bothered anybody. So
yeah, and you still see that today in some cases. There's always been a divide between the sort of city folk and the hill folk. The turn of the 20th century, it was really popular for people to go out into the hills and sort of take pictures of the hillbillies and the hill folk and things like that. There were a lot of really crazy folk stories that went around, people saying that hill folk can talk to birds and have this sort of natural magic about them and stuff like that. So it was definitely like a stereotype that I think kept a lot of people from learning a lot of very interesting things from the hill folk.
And that's unfortunate. Everybody's got their background stories.
Yeah.
Hopefully they haven't thinned out so bad with with time and what have you, that they just don't exist anymore.
I think there's still reminiscences of that. I mean, it's definitely an older generational sort of connection. But I think there's a lot of people. So, I'm a millennial. so like my parents' generation was really the generation where they wanted to get away from that. They wanted to move to town. They wanted to have, all of the stuff. They didn't want to be, I don't have much of an accent because I grew up with parents who didn't really have much of an accent anymore.
Right.
And so, but I have found my generation, younger generations now are sort of going back. People are moving back to farms and they're learning how to grow their own food and to raise animals. And they're kind of becoming hill folk again in a little bit of a way. So I find that to be kind of interesting too, the sort of folk revival that we're seeing today.
Kind of everything coming full circle.
Yeah. But it's definitely a generational thing. I mean, I think we'll have a few generations of people that are really into this, and then it'll go underground again probably for a while, and then it'll pop back up. So, but that's just kind of the way things work,
Quite often, yes. Yep. Now, I've done a couple of your classes there, and they've been awesome, just absolutely awesome. And I believe you've got one Sunday. I'm signed up for it. Is it the fairy?
Yeah, Saturday night.
Saturday night.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Ozark fairy magic and specifically fairy curses. So we're going to talk about the little people and all of the fantastic curses they can throw at you if you do things that are wrong. So
I'm signed up. So
it's going to be a fun one. We'll look at some traditional, approaches to the fae world. I always like giving this class every so often because I think people get really into, the other world and these invisible entities and things like that. But oftentimes they approach it with a really sort of loosey-goosey attitude.
Right. Yeah.
And from an Ozark perspective, it's like, no, you've got to be very, very careful. Generations of people with the second sight have been in the Ozarks, and all of them will say, it's not a pleasant thing to have, and so, yeah, I like giving this class every now and then just to sort of be like, if you've inadvertently made a deal with a fae being, here's how you can get out of it, maybe.
Ooh. My understanding, that's pretty dicey there.
Yes, very difficult.
No, but I'm completely looking forward to that. And I was there for the graveyards.
Yeah.
One and one other, and it's eluding me. I was going to write them down, and then I kind of got involved in a couple other projects, and then it was time. It's a magical land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, you would you care to share some of the fae lore, or just a couple of?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I could talk all day about the fae beings.
Who could?
So there's an interesting practice in the Ozarks. Of course, all of sort of Ozark folk magic and traditional healing, it varies from family to family, from practitioner to practitioner. But as I was sort of collecting things, I found a few different practitioners who kept talking about these, what they called rainbow curses and rainbow hexes. And so I kind of asked them, I finally got to the point where they were able to tell me what these things were. And so these are curses that follow colors. So, red, orange, yellow, things like that. And they specifically come from the little people mostly, but they come from specific fae beings depending on, what the color is. And so, for instance, like the red curse, and these are things that can be diagnosed on a person. So, it might manifest in very specific ways on a person. So at one point, hunting was survival in the Ozarks, and still is very popular, and it still is a part of a lot of people's source for meat every day. But it's certainly not the way it was in the old days. But The red curse is a curse is specifically related to hunting. So if you hunt in a way that dishonors the animal or dishonors the land, you can incur this red curse or this blood curse upon you. And so there are certain symptoms. Most of it is sort of curse to the hunter's luck. So in some stories, somebody that has this curse, they're out and they've got a deer in their sights, and they take the shot and it completely misses. And so they find another deer, they take a shot, completely misses. This is a sort of hunter's curse. And it's a part of this sort of blood curse, this red colored curse from hunting for sport, leaving behind an animal after you kill it, killing all white or all black animals. So in Ozark folklore, all white animals are considered to be very auspicious. And so they are sometimes even sort of beings in and of themselves, otherworldly beings.
Thinking the white stag who
Yeah,
may
exactly.
represent whichever one. I don't know, Hearn or perhaps Cernonius.
Yeah.
If I said that one right.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ones too. There's I think it's the Welsh story of Anun, or I think it's Pwyl, who's hunting in the woods and he gets distracted by a white deer and ends up in the other world. So it definitely has Northern European connections, this idea of white animals, but killing a white animal is a no-no. You don't kill white animals here. And all black animals are sometimes equally as auspicious, but a lot of times they're connected to witchcraft, or there are certain beings that can take the form of black animals. And so to kill one of these might, if you end up missing the whatever has taken the form of this creature, might come after you with a curse, that sort of thing. And so this sort of red curse is a curse that's incurred from this sort of dishonorable hunting practice. And so remedies for this varies with all of these sort of rainbow colored curses. The remedies are more than just taking a bath, or cleansing yourself with smoke, that sort of thing. Most of them involve actually going out and correcting whatever you did wrong. And so in the case of this hunting curse, you would have to go out and leave meat offerings. If you still have the animal, so one person that I talked to said, sometimes hunters will go out, they'll kill an animal and they'll only take certain types of meat from the animal, and then they'll leave the rest of it there. So one way of remedying the curse that would come from doing that is to take whatever meat you got and take it back to that spot and leave it as an offering. And that can sort of, heal that curse then. So yeah, there are a lot of these, and yeah, we'll go through the entire rainbow the night on Saturday night. So
awesome, fantastic. Yeah, I'm thinking that acts of contrition would be the requirement, and that kind of general overall covering of it.
Yeah.
Where were we going to go from here? Well, let's hear some of perhaps some of your, graveyard and spiritual work, if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I gave the class on graveyard magic a few weeks ago now, and it's always a fun one. Graveyard work, people always sort of associate that with ghosts. We're dealing with ghosts. But as you learned in the class, in the Ozarks, spirit means something very different than just ghost. The graveyard or the cemetery is a sort of crossroads zone. It's a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and the entities that can cross over are not just spirits of departed humans, but can also include fae beings, can include angels who may or may not have ever been human, can include a whole host of other beings as well. So when we work in the graveyard, we're really able to work with all of these different entities. But like I said in the class too, graveyard work doesn't just have to be spirit work either. So we can work in the graveyard without ever having to work with spirits at all. The graveyard in and of itself is, this crossroads. It's this blessed, sanctified ground. And so we can actually work with plants, we can work with minerals and rocks and other material that we can collect from the graveyard. And we can use that in any of our work. From an Ozark perspective, it just is auspicious because of the location. It doesn't necessarily have to be used for spirit work or spirit practices, but it can certainly. So using certain plants that you might collect or barks and things like that from the graveyard, using them in protection work or healing work or love work, whatever it might be. And the materia that's collected in this sort of nexus of the both worlds, of all worlds, the sort of center point of the worlds, the materia that we collect there is empowered. It's extra auspicious, no matter what we use it for.
Right. I had a thought there. We know how this happens to me. Jake, did you have any questions, thoughts? Okay.
That's me saying my dogs are acting up. So, but so Brandon, you make a lot of your classes available online and I dropped one for the graveyard magic. For someone that's most interested in like foundational Ozarkian magic and or legends, what series would you say start with? Because I'm dropping links in the chat. But
yeah, so there's a recording on the website. I did when the first book came out. I actually did a class on the book Ozark Folk Magic, and so we went through a lot of the foundational material, and so it should be in the recordings. I think it was like a walkthrough or an introduction to Ozark Folk Magic, Plants, Prayers, and Healing. I'm also hoping so the class that I'm offering on Saturday night is a free class, a free virtual class that I'm offering. And I have really wanted to start doing this because I really like teaching and I want to open up the teachings to a lot more people. So my goal is to once every couple months or so offer a free virtual class that anybody can sign up for. And I think the one that's after this one, the next one that we're going to do is Ozark Folk Magic 101. So it's going to be an introduction to Ozark Folk Magic, and it'll be a 2-hour just sort of free virtual lecture. And so I'm excited about starting to offer that, especially so the class that's coming up on Saturday night, I've had so many people interested in it and it really excites me. So I want to do an intro class. I've done that. I do a lot of my virtual classes through Catland Books in New York City. And they've been great. But I don't always have access to the recordings then. And so I really want to do an intro to Ozark Folk Magic through my website that I can just keep there. And if anybody wants it, years from now, I will have that recording and I can give it to them then. So that's going to be coming up. I think the first weekend in May. I think that first Saturday is right now the tentative plan to have that Saturday night for the intro class. But on the website, there is that recording where I go through the first book, Ozark Folk Magic.
Okay, I've been dropping those. And the other thing that stood out is you hear about the Wheel of the Year, especially with Wiccans. Wiccans? Like I said, this isn't my strong suit, people. How does that differ from other pagan practices, or it doesn't really?
So, yeah, I did a class on the Ozark Wheel of the Year. And, traditionally in the Ozarks, we don't have the sort of wheel calendar like you see in Wicca or other pagan areas. I think like Alsatru, the sort of heathen tradition, also has a calendar that's sort of circular. I mean, this is really, the way our ancestors probably would have gone about their year, because the year is naturally cyclical. But for Ozark people, a lot of that would have been focused in sort of what we call the Christian holidays. But in the Ozarks, they definitely added their own spin to a lot of these holidays. And we'd kind of talk about that in that Wheel of the Year class, where, for instance, Halloween is a big time on, the Wiccan, the pagan calendar. And culturally today, there's a lot of people that really connect to that holiday as, when the veil is thin, you do spirit practices, ancestral honoring practices, things like that. In the Ozarks, in the sort of old days, Halloween wasn't really ever celebrated at all. It was really only celebrated in the 20th century, when sort of mass marketing of Halloween decorations and things like that started going on the market. Traditionally in the Ozarks, there were families that brought sort of Halloween traditions from the old world, but it wasn't really a big spooky holiday. In the Ozarks, our spooky holiday was Christmas Eve. And that's actually, if you look back, that's a very traditional thing across Northern Europe. People forget that A Christmas Carol by Dickens is a ghost story. And so it was a big tradition amongst the Victorians to tell ghost stories around Christmas. And it just kind of died out in the culture, probably as Halloween sort of started rising up. But in the Ozarks, Christmas Eve was the time out of the year to do anything spooky and magical. So Christmas Eve was when you pass down verbal charms and prayers and power to your apprentice or to a family member. It's the time of the year where if you needed to do big healing work, you can do it on Christmas Eve. There's the tradition of midnight on Christmas Eve, all of the animals can talk. So you go out and you talk to your animals and you fill them in, everything the family's been doing. And it's also the time of the year where ghosts come out and wander the streets, where ancestral spirits can appear in dreams over, between Christmas Eve and Christmas morning, where, the little people, you always, on Christmas Eve, you leave out food outside and inside for the little people because you don't want to forget them.
Right.
You want to make sure that they're partying too. And so there are a lot of these sort of interesting traditions that in my own personal practice, I'm trying to revive a little bit more. But really, what I encourage people as far as Ozark practice goes is, it's okay to create your own Wheel of the Year too, as a part of your practice. And so we go over that in that class. One thing that I have done in my own practice is connecting to holidays and seasons that are really meaningful for me. And so, rather than connecting to times of the year where maybe plants aren't sprouting at this time, or what's more often. So in the Ozarks, we have a much warmer climate here. So for instance, our harvest festival is more like in mid-November, early December, because, around Lammas in September, we're still growing things. We're still, we've still got tomatoes and peppers growing and things like that. And so a lot of the holidays that were sort of developed in a very a much colder Northern European climate doesn't always translate. And so that class is really about examining our own cycles, examining our own connections to the cycle of the year, and, letting our celebrations be meaningful. When I was involved with the pagan circles and things like that, I could never really connect to the pagan holidays because most of the time it was just me celebrating them or, me in a small group. But, I was always, having big celebrations in the middle of summer for my birthday. My birthday's in June, or big celebrations around the 4th of July, things like that. And so in the class, we sort of talk about how we all have these sort of celebrations, and we can associate whatever meaning we want with these celebrations. If this is a time where you naturally will get together with friends and family, then let it be that. Let it be a feast honoring whatever you want it to honor, the summer, the changing of the seasons, whatever it might be. And so connecting to the points of the year where, we have this deep sort of good feeling, cozy feeling, rather than trying to force yourself into celebrating a holiday just because it's a part of a calendar.
Right. Into the mold.
Yeah. And so, I don't really identify as a Christian anymore, but I like Easter because it's a time when all my family gets together and we have really good food, and we see people we haven't seen in a while. And so I've taken Easter as a part of my practice, and I associate it with the spring and with rebirth, and the rebirth of the land, and rebirth of, connections and all of this other stuff.
More Ostara.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If that's how that one's pronounced there.
Yeah. And
you always hear a whole lot of different ways. So.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. But so rather than me celebrating Ostara alone,
Right.
I celebrate the same meaning behind it, but on a holiday that, I have, connections with friends and families and things like that. And so, yeah, that it's interesting to examine those cycles, because I think, I went through this when I was first interested in paganism and witchcraft and things, where it really felt like, oh, this is what everybody's doing, so I need to move into that. But then I started realizing that, this is just a model. This is just a template. You don't have to take this exactly. You can connect with whatever traditions you want to connect with, whatever's most meaningful for you. So yeah, in the Ozarks, traditionally, there have been points of the year that were particularly auspicious or special. Christmas Eve, May Day is another one of those. May Eve and also May Day. And there are some other ones, but they kind of merged with either Christian holidays or federal holidays, and that's okay. We can celebrate things however we want. So
absolutely, yeah. I know you've worked with a lot of Native American beliefs and traditions, and what are their thoughts on the killing of the white animals or black animals or anything at all like that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Ozark folk culture is really more influenced by indigenous people of the Southeast. So around 1800, with the Indian Removal Act, the U.S. government removed the Osage, who were in the Ozarks, to Oklahoma. And that's the reason why the land opened up for settlement from Appalachia. So there isn't a lot of Osage and Ozark overlap, unfortunately. But where you do see a lot of indigenous influences from people of the Southeast. So the Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, Yuchi, Coasati, Chickasaw, Shawnee, lots of different groups there in the Southeast. But you do see that trickle into Ozark folk belief. I have a theory that a lot of the sort of magical curses and things like that there was some influence from indigenous folk beliefs. I've talked to both Cherokee and Muskogee Creek representatives who had traditional beliefs that are very similar about hunting, where you take the entire animal, you leave behind certain parts of the animal. So that's an Ozark tradition, to leave behind certain organs behind, or certain parts of the whatever animal you have killed, as a sort of offering, even though Ozark people might not call it an offering. It's
Right, yeah.
in a lot of cases I've
A
talked to
gift or thank
yeah,
you.
well, I've talked to hunters who just say, when I asked, well, why do you leave this behind? They just say, oh, well, it's not fit for eating, and it's just an old superstition. But it's an old superstition that they are very, very adamant about following because they don't want to be cursed. So there's definitely something there that's not just, an old superstition. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of these. You see a lot of them in hunting. There's a lot of hunting lore in the Ozarks that is very similar to hunting lore, amongst people in the South, indigenous people in the Southeast. The Ozark idea of the little people is almost certainly influenced by indigenous folk beliefs as well. The Cherokee still call them the little people as well. the Muskogee Creek, I think, also called them the little people. And so that is more than likely an interaction between the two groups. So the Ozark little people are definitely, they definitely have a sort of common ancestor in Europe as well, amongst European fairy traditions. But there are a lot of weird beliefs about the little people that I think come from indigenous sources. So yeah, so there are definitely those overlapping areas, and those are interesting for me to look at. I mean, I always encourage people to share and to talk to people, and to, of course, respect practices, but to be also open and say, I mean, it's all right that our practices are influenced by these other traditions. It's okay. We don't have to cut them out. We can just practice what we practice, because it's become something that we can't necessarily separate out the different parts anymore. Another sort of influence is red cedar. So one of our sort of Ozark sacred plants is the red cedar. It's not actually a cedar, it's a juniper, Juniperus virginiana.
Okay.
So Highland people in Scotland and Highland areas of Germany were using European juniper. Magically, they were taking the juniper and burning it in their homes, clearing out spirits, using it medicinally. Well, those Europeans came to the New World. They found the Eastern red cedar, which is a juniper, and they found indigenous people using red cedar in the exact same way that they were using using juniper back in their home countries.
Isn't that interesting? That's just, it's staggering.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and there's a lot of those sort of two different groups of people, forming these connections in very similar ways, and then sort of coming together. So traditions involving red cedar in the Ozarks is really hard to tell where they came from. And that's okay. It's become its own sort of thing. We can see the fingerprints of other cultures, but it is still its own thing.
Now, I'm not sure across the border, but they're over in Pineville and Knoll and that area. A lot of the waters are, I'm not going to say contaminated because that's not right, but they always smelled sulfury to me. Was that brought on? Did that bring on any superstitions about it, or thoughts, practices?
Yeah, so water is an area, because again, Ozark people were, survivalists. They were poor. They had to use what they had. So in the Ozarks, there are a lot of different types of waters that are used for healing purposes, for magical purposes, things like that. And so, for instance, spring water, like from a spring, is considered more auspicious than tap water, things like that.
Mhm.
One of the most auspicious water types is water collected from inside of a cave. So water that
Okay.
has never seen the sun, so has never had sunlight on it. So normally people would collect it inside of the cave and then cover it up with a cloth, and then take it home and put it in a closet and then use it as a part of the practice because it's never seen sunlight. Well, another interesting water type is this sort of sulfury water, well water that is,
Mhm.
sulfury. That, yeah, you do definitely get that up in Missouri. There are other areas. I remember some relatives in Arkansas here that had pretty sulfury well water too.
Okay.
But I've encountered healers who would use the sulfur water as a part of their healing practice, believing it was more mineral rich water.
Okay.
And so the minerals in the water would actually aid in the healing process. So I met an herbalist who only made their liquid herbal medicines using spring water or well water, sulfur well water,
Wow.
because they believe that not only was it a more auspicious water, but it was also healthier water. It was better for you. And they always told me anyway, that if you make your medicines with tap water, they'll never be good, which in my personal experience, that is not the case,
Right.
uh, but
But
it is,
yeah.
it's a folk belief.
Mhm.
But there's also in Ozark folk magic, there are lots of different plants and mineral compounds used for exorcisms, for driving out spirits. Specifically, things that have a bad smell to them are said to ward off or send away evil and witchcraft and evil spirits and demons and things like that.
Hmm.
And so sulfur is one of these. Sulfur powder was used as a protective powder in the home. So put outside of the doorways to protect against evil, things like that.
Cool.
And so I've met folk practitioners who swore by sulfury water for the same purpose. So you can use the sulfury water in your ritual baths to scare off the evil from your body, things like that. So yeah, that's definitely one of those specialty water types that has crept into Ozark folk magic.
Mhm. Yeah, it was always kind of difficult to just drink,
Yeah,
after Kansas City water, and we'd go down for vacation, and oh my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely know exactly what you're talking about. Especially, when I encountered it, I was a kid, and so it's hard to get a kid to drink water anyway, and then it smells
Mhm.
like eggs, and so
Yeah, and bleh. Grandma was like, "Oh, honey, you can have a Diet Coke."
yeah.
"Okay, thanks, grandma." I was spoiled. You probably
Right.
couldn't tell that, yeah. But, okay, there was that question. Okay, in your graveyard practices, you
Mhm.
talked a lot about, using coffin nails
Mm.
and being able to get the thorns, the hawthorns, was that right? Or
Honey locusts. Yeah,
honey
honey
locust,
locusts.
okay, okay. And using those instead, what would you use those for?
So, yeah, you could also use hawthorn thorns if there's a hawthorn growing. There is a mountain hawthorn in the Ozarks, I believe. I think it's a
Mhm,
crataegus, which is the same sort of hawthorn. But basically, yeah, any thorny tree or bush inside of a graveyard, slash cemetery. That was a thing that came up. Just as an aside, that was a question that came up a lot with that class, and then after the class, what's the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery?
mhm.
And from an Ozark perspective, there's no difference. And from like a personal perspective, I don't know the difference between the two. I think it has to do with, I think one is enclosed and one is not enclosed.
Or one
I
is
don't,
adjacent to a church, the graveyard, because it's a yard, and then the
okay.
cemetery is off. Jake, am I getting that right? And I think
I
I may have
I
even
think
asked you
that's right.
about it
I
because I've
think
been
yeah,
jumped because
yeah,
of it.
yeah, I think graveyards are with churches and cemeteries are just open plots.
Right, right. Well,
Well,
all
yeah.
blessed lands, though.
Yeah, and from an
Mhm.
Ozark perspective, they're used interchangeably, which I think was
Mhm.
my answer to the question, like when it came
Yes,
during the
yes.
class. But yeah, so any thorny tree or bush growing inside of the boundaries of the graveyard can be used as a substitute for coffin nails.
Mhm.
So traditionally, in the old days, it was very common for people to have access to dead bodies, to coffins, to things like that. It was a tradition in the Ozark. Wakes was a pretty big tradition
Oh,
here.
yeah. Yep.
And so, in the old days, collecting coffin nails, you just go up to the coffin and you knock out a couple nails, and that's that. So you've got coffin nails then. So today it's very different.
Right,
It's
yes.
very difficult to collect certain things like that. And so a tradition that has sort of, you know, evolved in reaction, I guess, or as an answer to it being more difficult to acquire these things, is that, we have transferred the meaning from the coffin nails to these thorns that grow in the graveyard. And thorns are used in a lot of different ritual work in the Ozarks. They're basically used as substitutes for nails and needles. So the sort of natural nails or needles. A lot of times they're used in protective work. So they are representative of spears or swords in work.
Okay.
So they may be put into a charm bag and then hung up in the house. The idea being that these little swords and little spears will fight on your behalf before anything enters your home. Or they might be carried for the same purposes. They're also used in ritual work to connect certain correspondences and purposes to a person. So you might use a doll representative of the person and then connect charm papers and things like that to the doll. This is used more often in healing rituals in the Ozarks. There's the association with like the voodoo dolls and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
In the Ozarks, we do have what are called spite dolls, which are used for retribution work and things like that. But more often, these puppets are used for healers to be able to heal remotely, so that the person doesn't have to be there. And so in this case, you might use very thin thorns to connect these papers to the doll, or to even sew. I've seen healers who would sew with thorns as a replacement for a needle. There's certain types of work in the Ozarks where metal is forbidden as a part of the work. And so in that case, you would use a thorn as a replacement for a nail or as a replacement for a needle. Usually work that is aimed at creating like a spirit home or working with spirits. There's a folk belief that spirits don't like metal, specifically the fae beings, and this is kind of a European tradition too. And so if you are making a house for a fae being to be able to work with them as a familiar, for instance, you wouldn't use metal in any of the work. So you would use a thorn as a replacement for a needle if you were sewing something.
Okay.
But then they also have a symbolic, meaning in and of
Sure.
themselves. But yeah, used in replacing coffin nails. Coffin nails, from an Ozark perspective, aren't just used for like death work or spirit work. They can be used for a lot of different purposes: protective work, cleansing work, things like that. It's just by virtue of the object being in the location, it is naturally more auspicious than a regular nail that you would get. But that said, coffin nails have traditionally been used in the Ozarks for exorcism practices, for binding or sealing spirits, for nailing spirits to a certain spot, things like that. And you can replace those coffin nails in those same rituals with thorns.
Sorry.
You're good.
Still have gnats. There we go. Is there lore around skeleton keys? Heather has a question there.
Yeah. So Skeleton keys used as pendulums in the Ozarks. That's a pretty old tradition. I think Vance Randolph might have even talked about them. Taking a skeleton key, tying a string through the hole, and then hanging it as a pendulum and observing the way it spins. Generally in the Ozarks, you would name a certain direction as yes or no, and then use it, observe how it spins. So yeah, skeleton keys in particular were favored over, ordinary keys for divination work. There are other rituals too. If you happen to be able to get like a old lock and key, like a padlock and key, there's certain work that you can do for, unlocking, for instance, I think in the spell book, I think it might be in the spell book. I don't think it's in the first book. I think it's in the spell book, but for unlocking like fortune and prosperity, there are rituals for that, where as a part of the ritual, you physically unlock the padlock and then you keep the padlock open with the key as a part of the sort of charm or the talisman. The skeleton keys, though, by and large, used for divination as pendulums. I know there's a tradition, doesn't pop up in the Ozarks, but as a part of cunning craft tradition from Northern Europe, pouring wax through the loop end of a skeleton key into water, and then taking the wax out and looking for divination sort of signs and symbols within the wax. That doesn't really pop up much in the Ozarks, but is interesting.
I think that it's also it goes back to, I'm going to forget which Greek goddess was associated with witchcraft and protection, and she always had the two dogs with her, and that. But she was also a keeper of keys, and I think it was something about doorways. But golly, it all gets jumbled up there sometimes.
Right.
I apologize.
No, but you did saying that does make me remember Ozark ritual specifically for opening up like doorways to the other world, things like that. There are rituals where you anoint a doorway and then use a key to unlock the door and open it as a part of the ritual work, and then you step through the doorway. Also, there's a lot of sort of trance work, vision work, dream work that involves opening up a door. So in that case, it might be a skeleton key that's used to open up that door. But yeah, connecting the physical act to the symbolic, magical act of opening.
Yeah, Hecate. Sorry, guys. That was it. I've even got the key symbol on my car. So
yeah.
But yeah, I find the old skeleton keys just fascinating for some reason. They really draw me in. I have a couple of really cool ones, but I'm not going to go get them right now. So
yeah.
Finding authentic ones is becoming a craft in itself.
Yeah, fewer and fewer old houses have skeleton keys anymore. I have one somewhere around here, but it was one that a friend gave me. I imagine if you were to find a skeleton key and know the house that it came out of, that would probably be like extra auspicious.
Oh boy, yeah. Yep. Indeed. We all have brain fart. Yeah, we do, especially me. Oh, Heather got hers in NOLA.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and there are places online where you can even get like coffin nails still today that are supposedly actual coffin nails.
Right.
The stipulation as far as the Ozarks go is the coffin nail has had to have been in a coffin.
And in the dirt, or just in the coffin itself?
In the graveyard or the cemetery at the very least. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the dirt. I'm sure there are probably differing opinions even in the Ozarks about that, but the people that I have talked to directly about them, they all say it has to have at least passed the threshold of the graveyard cemetery
Okay.
and then popped out of the coffin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I know that you also mentioned a couple of different flowers that are probably more native down south a little bit there than up here in Kansas City. But could you go over those again? Because there were a couple I had never heard of them, so I didn't even know what they looked like.
So I think one of them that I talked about was horse mint,
Mm-hmm.
which actually does grow up in Kansas City. I don't know if it's native up there, but I know it will grow well
It
in a
will grow.
garden up
Okay.
there,
Cool.
because it is native to the northern parts of the Ozarks and Missouri, so
Mm-hmm.
not very far. So horse mint is a name given by Ozarkers to all of the species of Monardas, the Monarda genus, and so a lot of people will probably know it as bee balm.
Oh
Is
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a crimson bee balm that a lot of people grow. It makes these really pretty red flowers. Hummingbirds love them, so people grow them in hummingbird gardens.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of other different species, though. My favorite is wild bergamot, and it
Okay.
just smells like Earl Grey tea. The citrus bergamot that they use in Earl Grey. It has that same sort of scent, so it was called wild bergamot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so all of these monardas in the Ozarks have associations with spirits. Specifically, they're used in baths to detach spirits or spiritual influences from a person.
Okay.
So it's one that I recommend to people, if you go into graveyards or haunted houses a lot and you're worried about spirits coming home with you, you can make a tea of these Monarda plants, these flowers, and
Oh
spray it on
yeah.
yourself, or you can bathe with it to detach any of that spiritual influence stuff. And so, horse mint, any of these growing inside of a graveyard or cemetery, is extra auspicious, especially when you're working with spiritual influences. So, I usually always keep my eye open to see if there's any growing in any of the graveyards that I frequent.
I'm thinking I
Uh,
may have to go plant some. So.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it grows really quick. It's a wildflower. It's
Mm-hmm.
sort of naturally suited to the soil types that we have in the
It
Ozarks.
is. Mm-hmm.
And the seeds are, I mean, you can get a pack of like thousands of seeds for next to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I have two different plots in my backyard that have two different kinds of monardas growing in them. And literally, I just took the seeds and threw them and raked over it a little bit, and they grow every year, and they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, these plants growing in the graveyard, extra auspicious, specifically for working with spirits, spiritual cleansings and things like that. So
Interesting.
cleansing even possessions. You can
Mm-hmm.
even cleanse a home, so you can even detach spirits from inside of a home by making a wash with these flowers and then mopping the floors or wiping down the doorways, that sort of thing.
Maybe doing smudge sticks with your own
Yeah.
brand of whatever. I don't always go with sage because, well, first off, white sage is almost impossible to grow up here.
Yeah.
So, just lavender. You can do lavender really easily, and rosemary, and that all grows quite well up here,
Or
and some of my
juniper.
favorite scents. Mm-hmm. Yes, and
Yeah.
juniper as well.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
juniper, red cedar, both are really good cleansing smokes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the Monardas, you definitely can use them as a smoke. In the Ozarks, you see it more associated with water than with smoke.
Sure.
Typically, the sort of sacred smokes that we use involve either red cedar or tobacco is another one that
Mm-hmm.
would have come in directly from indigenous people. Um, but yeah, the Monardas mostly associated with baths, with sprays, with washes, that sort of thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I mean, any plant in the graveyard can be used. I've
Mhm.
definitely known people who so one guy that I talked to as an informant, he did a lot of work in the graveyard, and there were a few in his area that he mowed. So he would go and mow the grass in these graveyards, and he would collect some of the grass clippings, and he would
Cool.
save them in a bag, and he would take them home and dry them out. And so he had like, just dried grass and weeds and probably some Monarda in there, sprouting up.
Little
And
poison ivy, whatever.
whatever. So he would save this dried, and whenever he needed to do like a cleansing smoke or anything like that, he would actually burn this stuff, and it didn't smell very good, but that's another part of the process too, this sort of pungent smell that drives out evil spirits and sickness and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, he just collected the grass clippings, and no one even thought he was doing anything. They were just, oh, he's mowing the grass, he's collecting grass clippings, no big deal.
Yeah.
So that's I think in the class I talked about this, how if you want to get started working in the graveyard, you can do things like this, like mowing the grass or picking up trash or whatever you might be doing. And if you do that, not only are you honoring the land, honoring the place itself by helping the place, but also people aren't going to pay any attention to you if you collect some plants or,
Right. Or
take some
little
bark off of a
dirt.
tree or a little dirt here and there, that sort of thing. People usually won't even pay any attention to it. So,
Right. Yeah.
and this is, all of the workers that I've met who worked frequently in the graveyards, they all volunteered in the graveyards. And that's, I think, a big part of the work is just honoring the place by maintaining it. That's a huge tradition in the Ozarks that is sadly dying out. We used to have a lot of what's called decoration days. And these were days throughout the year where people would literally, entire communities would have cookouts in the graveyard, and they would clean off the graves and put new flowers and sometimes even wash the graves, things like that. And sadly, it's a tradition that's sort of dying out in the area, but that's sort of the heart of this graveyard practice, is honoring the space. Honoring the space for what it is and for the things that live there.
And the ancestors buried there, the
Sure.
remembrance and the right. It's all positive.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be some grand ritual or show. Connecting to those energies is sometimes just being there and being respectful. That's why I always tell people, for anything that you take out of the graveyard, leave a gift behind, leave some food for the birds, or, pour some water on the gate, or leave some coins. That's pretty traditional too. Leaving coins at the gate to the graveyard. Paying for the things that you took out of the space as a form of honoring the space.
Water on the gate?
Yeah, so washing the gate or washing the
Okay.
pillars of the gate. These days, not all cemeteries have the same sort of gates that they used to. Like old cemeteries, sometimes have like brick walls and brick gates and iron gates and things like that. But any entrance into the graveyard, just taking some water and washing either the ground around it or washing the gate itself, as a way of sort of cleaning the space as a form of like honoring. So the informant that gave me that practice specifically said it was like, when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, it's this washing of the gate as a form of respect. But then there's also definitely this sort of feeding aspect too, like you're giving water to the spirits that are there. Things like that. I've also seen people, as a way of honoring the people that are buried there, washing the tombstones is a pretty popular thing to do.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
All righty. Jake, how we doing? Hang on.
5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I was like, is that a 5 or is it
Are
a
we?
stop
Hold
or a
on,
wait?
stop. What are we?
Just 5. Just 5. Just 5 minutes.
Okay, so, anyway, yeah. I was thinking the entrance to the graveyards. That's another. It's another doorway.
Yeah.
One side to the other there, and you
Yeah.
definitely want to keep that as neat and tidy and cleansed of negative stuff as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, some of the work that can be done in the graveyard is returning spirits back to the graveyard. So, as a part
Okay.
of like an exorcism in a home, one Ozark method is to have graveyard dirt as a part of the ritual, and the idea is that the spirit is attracted to the graveyard dirt, to the magical innate quality of the dirt. So, as a part of the ritual, the spirit is led to the dirt and then taken. Usually it's a jar of dirt or a bottle of dirt or container, and they're taken to the graveyard and placed there. So the dirt would be poured out either into a grave or onto a grave or just around a tree in sort of a neutral spot. And
Okay.
so if you are doing that type of work, respecting the entrance to that place is very important, because the entrance is what's going to keep that spirit in the space.
Mhm.
And so you want to be friends with this, the keeper of the gate, with the sort of spirit that is at the head of that. Usually in Ozark folklore, there's always a king and sometimes a king and a queen of the graveyard, and this
Oh,
is
that's
the
right.
sort of the person, the people, the couples, the whoever was buried there first.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it can be a king or a queen or both sometimes if it's a couple. But these are sort of the oldest members of the graveyard, and these are the people, the spirits that sort of keep things in check. So if you are depositing spirits in their domain, it's good to be on their good side so that they
Oh,
keep
yeah.
the spirits there and don't let them out to return back to your home or to wherever they came
Mhm.
from.
Mhm.
So yeah, honoring the space in and of itself can be a very meaningful practice. Even if we don't work with spirits, we can work with the land, with the space itself. So
Mhm.
helping to clean up the space, to maintain the space as a ritual practice in and of itself, I think it can be very powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right now.
Now, real quick, Brandon, because that's really interesting to me. I want to check this out more. Is this in your Tell the Tombs class
Yeah.
or? Okay.
Yeah. It should be in that class. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to buy that class right now.
And then, of course, for you, if you have any other questions, you can just send me an email. We can.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
For
Thank
sure.
you. But
Okay.
you really got to be careful what you open yourself up to with Jake, because he's more out there than I am.
I'm just a little cozy ghost hunter with 5 puppy dogs that need daddy to come home safe and sound.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'll get Satan on your ass.
I mean, in my own work, like the amount of haunted barns I have been brought to, and all to clean out spirits and all this other stuff. So I am always happy to swap ghost exorcism hunting stories. So
Okay.
Oh, cool. Yay. Maybe we'll just make that a show at another point in time.
I would love that. Yeah.
Oh, that would be
Yeah.
fun.
Oh yeah, we
I
could
don't
do
want
that.
it to be another year or whatever before we talk with you again.
No, we have to do it sooner than that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Alrighty then. Your website, Ozark
Ozark
Healing Traditions.
OzarkHealing.com.
.com.
Ozark Healing Traditions on Facebook, and then
Mhm.
at Ozark Healing Traditions on Instagram,
Okay.
and at Ozark Healing on Twitter. But yeah, the website is ozarkhealing.com. That's where I post all of my upcoming classes. And if they're not through my website, I always post links to buy tickets elsewhere. And so, yeah, I'm hoping to have another series of classes with Catland Books, maybe this summer, maybe early fall. And then in the meantime, definitely going to start offering some free or pay what you can classes just to get people, some interested people some information that they might need.
Give me a holler if you need any help, or we can always tag Jake, and he's a pretty good whiz kid. So he is our techno wizard.
I make things happen online.
Is much needed because I am not a tech online person.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm available a lot of the time, so yeah, just let me know. Just give me a holler.
I just bought that class, so you'll be getting an email from me.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I will be sharing that class with you probably tomorrow, but yeah.
Okay. Woohoo. All right, guys.
We'll have you back for the ghost story thing because we love to tell ghost stories.
We
like to talk about monsters and ghosts a lot.
I have a lot of ghost stories. I mean, that's one thing that's a part of the business that I do is people hire me out for exorcisms and all sorts of stuff.
Maybe there's the fourth book.
Yeah, no. Let me tell you, the amount of books I have ideas for, I'm set for the next 20 years probably.
Okay.
Awesome.
So, that's definitely on my mind. I'd like to do a book about the Ozark Otherworld and talk about spirit practices and spirit work and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah, because I know every time we get to the most gangsta ghost AF time period, December 5th through January 14th, we always have a creepy ghost thing for them. Because the 14th is when I gotta hop soon. In Scandinavia, usually things end at Orthodox Christmas, which is January 6th through 8th, somewhere in there. But turns out in Scandinavia, they have another night on January 14th.
Nice.
Which is, I sent you a link to it before, Wendy. I can look it up again. But they've got a one last jump scare for the holiday season on January 14th. So,
well, I was surprised about their werewolves.
Yeah.
During the holidays, the werewolves were brought up, and I went, "What?"
Yeah, werewolves. That's the Quebecois are known for their I think it's loup-garou.
Yeah.
Loup-garou, which
there's a Cajun Louisiana version that's the rougarou, but it's just a mispronunciation of loup-garou.
Yeah. Everything about it was pretty similar. Yeah. You got a swamp werewolf versus versus your standard French baguette eating werewolf. Don't hate me, people. My people are from up that neck of the way. Okay. Okay, kids. It's about that time. I know next week we have a very chipper evening where we're going to talk about cannibals, necrophilia, incest, all that disgusting true crime stuff. I'm teasing already. I'm spoiling. I'm doing the Ripper Crew from Chicago in the 70s. It had a little bit of everything.
I haven't decided. I may just do it like an interview.
Yeah, we're chipper. It's a true crime next week. Very disgusting cannibalistic serial killer episode at Mystic Cafe. Because nothing says spring like cannibalism. So with that, and Merle will be here next week too. He couldn't make it tonight.
Brandon, thank you so much. It's been a great show. And
thank you.
We'll keep a little closer in touch and plan a few more things.
Yeah, I would love that. Just let me know.
Good deal. I will do. Kids. All right, Jake.
Well, have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.